The importance of game theory in politics. What is game theory? Game theory is a branch of mathematics that provides tools for analyzing situations in which parties called players can make decisions to benefit them, given the strategies other players can make. Game theory can also be used in the social sciences, most notably in economics as well as biology, engineering, political science, international relations, computer science, and philosophy. The approach of game theory is to make your best strategy and to seek to determine your rival's most profitable strategy to counteract with your own strategy. Basically, game theory is a way to look at all possible outcomes of a rule based interaction. The history of game theory. John von Neumann was a Hungarian-American mathematician, physicist, computer analyst, and economist. He teamed up with Oscar Morgenstern to develop game theory. And in 1944, Neumann and Oscar Morgenstern published the book called Theory of Games and Economic Behavior. And in 1950, John Nash invents the concept Nash equilibrium. Nash equilibrium is a strategy for every player's action to be the best response to other players' strategy. In 1994, John C. Harsanyi, John Forbes, Nash Jr., and Reinhard Sultan won Nobel Prize in Economics. So the key elements of a game, the players who is interacting, their strategies, what are their options, their payoffs as the outcome of their strategy applied by the player. Payoffs can be anything depending on the game. Information, what do they know? Rationality, how do they think? Types of games. Cooperative games are the ones in which players are convinced to adopt a particular strategy through negotiations and agreements between players. Non cooperative games refer to the games in which the players decide their own strategy to maximize profit. A very deep analysis of the problem takes place in non cooperative games like Prisoner's Dilemma. Normal form is when payoff and strategies of a game is represented in a tabular form. Normal form games help in identifying dominant strategies and Nash equilibrium. Extensive form games are the ones in which a description of the game is in the form of a decision tree. This game helps in the representation of events that can occur by chance. Simultaneous move games are the one in which two players move simultaneously and they do not have knowledge about the move of the other player. Sequential games are same as extensive while they are representative in extensive form. So the prisoner's dilemma is the most common and popular pro- example used when talking about game theory. There are two prisoners, A and B. If they both confess, they get 10 years each in prison. If one of them confesses, that prisoner will go free, while the other will spend 20 years in prison. If none of them confesses, they both get 5 years. So, the two prisoners' strategies would be to confess or not to confess. The payoffs of the game are 5, 10, 20 years in prison. The best strategy for both is to confess because the best payoff, regardless of the other player's strategy, would be to confess. They both confess, they would get 10 years. This is the dominant strategy when each player chooses their best strategy, which is to confess. So, how does game theory fit in politics? So, the most this election this year is Biden versus Trump, where 270 votes are needed to win. Joe Biden got 306, while Donald Trump got 232. These are the states where Biden won, the blue, and Trump won in orange. So, how can game theory help a presidential candidate win? Game theory plays an important role in how candidates campaign in the presidential election. It is the reason why candidates focus more on swing states with higher electoral votes than states that trend in consistent directions. For, ex- for example, the US presidential election in 2004. Let's say George Bush and John Kerry have only one day to visit a state, Florida or Ohio. They're both key swing states. George Bush can use game theory to know which state to visit. If Bush has a 70% chance of winning in Florida and 30% chance of winning in Ohio, where should he go? By visiting a state, we'll assume that he'll get a 10% increase in chance of winning. If both Bush and Kerry go to the same state, for example, we're going to assume that Bush will have a 21% chance of winning the overall election. If Bush visits Florida and Kerry visits Ohio, Bush will drop to 16% chance of winning. But if Bush goes to Ohio and Kerry goes to Florida, then his chances of winning will become 24%. So his dominant strategy is to go to Ohio because he'll get a 24% to 21% chance of winning. The advantages and disadvantages or limitations of game theory. Game theory gives insight into several less known aspects which arise in situations of conflicting interest. For example, it describes and explains a conflict and possible strategies to use in a game. Game theory develops a framework for analyzing decision making situations, and at least two person zero sum games. Game theory outlines the framework that can be used by players to arrive at an optimal strategy. The disadvantages and limitations of game theory. The assumption that players have the knowledge about their own payoff and payoffs of others is not practical. The techniques of solving games involving mixed strategies, particularly in case of large payoff matrix, is very complicated. All the competitive problems cannot be analyzed with the help of game theory. There is also the problem with rationality, how your rival or competitor might not act the way you think they will. Conclusion. The game theory gives you a way of exploring and understanding rational behavior. It helps you to think through how people will behave given your likely behavior. It is therefore a useful tool when thinking about your strategies or in understanding our opponent's probable behavior under different circumstances. This is President Trump's strategy in the presidential debate, where he just interrupts Joe Biden's turn to talk. Thank you for listening.